Hello folks, welcome to Canal Channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how we replace the front rotors and brake pads on this Toyota Camry. And with that said, let's jump right into it. Here we have our rotor or brake pads, and we have the passenger side turned toward us, so that way we can get to the bolts on the side, which are the 240 millimeter and the 270 millimeter for the bracket. So that way we take that off, and then we get the rotor out, put the new one in, and then start putting everything back together with our new brake pads. And one thing we're gonna be doing also is we're gonna remove the cap on the master cylinder for the oil and just sit it there. So when we compress the pistons back to back in, all the oil that comes back up doesn't create pressure here. Before we start taking anything out, what we're gonna be doing is we're just gonna compress the piston back in into the caliper, so that way when we take off, everything comes out smooth, and then we're gonna completely compress it once it's outside, because that piston has to go in all the way in, so that way when the new thickness of the rotor comes in and the new brake pads are in, everything fits, because it's gonna get thicker and the piston has to go in, so the caliper mounts right into it. So now that we have compressed the piston all the way in, as you can see, we're gonna take off these 240 millimeter bolts. They're the guides, so the sliders. And once we take those off, the piston or the caliper will come off, and that way we can start taking the bracket or the base or the caliper. So then that way we can take the rotor off. So now that we have removed the caliper, we have the brake pads right in here. So we're gonna take those off, and then we're gonna have to remove two 70 millimeter bolts, so we can remove this bracket from there, so that the rotor slides out, and then we can put the new one in. So if we don't take this bracket, we can remove if we don't take that bracket off, we can remove the brake rotor. So we need to remove that. So now that we have taken off the old rotor, we take out the package, the new one, and we put it in. So now that we have our rotor, we put our bracket for the caliper on. But when you're gonna put this, make sure that if you're putting brakes and these come with it, these little metals, replace them, because these are the ones that keep the tension onto the brake pad, so it doesn't bounce around. It makes crazy noises, these guys, you see. So replace these with new ones if they come with your brake pads. And if not, and if you have to buy them because they're in bad shape, buy them and replace them. So our brakes have these, so we're gonna install them so everything's fresh and new. When you're installing the stainless steel little tabs, be careful. Don't cut yourself, because they're pretty sharp. And one thing we want to say is that when you're sliding them into it, make sure that this round part is outside, and this other end where it compresses is towards the inside where the rotor is for both sides. So as you can see, because the brake pad is going to come out from the outside in, and it's going to slide right in here, and as it goes in, it's going to compress this, and it's going to be locked right in here. Same on this other side. So now that we have put the sheet metal into the bracket, we put the bracket back on so we can start putting everything together. If you're fighting the rotor and you don't want to fight it, put two of the lug nuts on, so that way they keep the rotor against the hub, and it doesn't flap around. So that way when you're putting everything back together, the rotor is in one point and it's not flapping around. So for these bolts, we're gonna put some blue Loctite just to drop, so that way these don't loosen themselves with time. So now we got those two 70mm bolts in. So we're just gonna tighten them. Now that we have put the bracket on, we put the brake pads so we can start putting our caliper back on. One is gonna slide from the outside in, and the other one is gonna come on from the inside out. So these brake pads didn't come with these little springs, but we're gonna put them on. There's little holes in here that we put one on one side, one on the other side, just like this. And what this does, it forces the brake pad to spread away a little bit from the rotor so it doesn't create that much friction as it didn't have it. So this is a like a spring pushing them away when they're not in use. So now that we have put the rotor and the brakes and everything's ready to go, the caliper, we already have compressed it from the beginning, so it's all the way in. But we're gonna show you on the other one how we compress it with a C-clamp. So in this case, we're just gonna put it on because we compress it all the way from the beginning with the rotor and everything inwards. So now we go to the other side and show you that. With this gauge, we're gonna take a measurement and see how thick this whole system is right now, brand new, and we're gonna compare it to the old one that we just took out. So the system we just put in is about 2.5 inches thick, and that's the distance, and we're gonna compare to what we took out. So now let's see how thick the old one was. That's a big difference. That's about more than 1/4 inch. So it was 1/4 inch, a little bit more than 1/4 inch the thickness. So now that's a lot if it was a rotor. So now we put the caliper back on and bolting it down and continue to the driver's side. There it is. We have replaced rotor and brake pads on the passenger side. So now we continue on the driver's side. So sometimes the brakes, when you're sliding a rotor, when you slide a caliper out and the brakes come with it, you can't slide it out because the brakes might be getting jammed into the grooves where it's engraved into the rotor. So what I do is sometimes I compress the pistons in. I like to do that so everything slides out. You know, in this case, the caliper only slides out. So I'm gonna compress it a little bit so that way it slides out smooth. And then we'll show you how we finally compress it in for putting it back on. So same procedure, we took out the two 40mm bolts that holding the caliper against the bracket. So now we can slide it out, rest it up here, and then we can take the brake pads off, and then we can take the two 70mm bolts off so we can get the bracket and then the rotor off. So now, in our case, this rotor is loose, so it can come out easy. But if your case is that it won't budge, hit it right here between the studs. Don't hit the studs because you're gonna damage them. Hit them right here in the middle, or hit them sideways here. Don't hit it right where the brake pads sit or outside, because if you can't get it out and you damage this area, if you put it back, you have to put everything back together. You're gonna have a damaged rotor from the surface where the brake pads touch. So hit it right about this area so it pops. And then sometimes because there's so much oxidation builds up here or rust, you can wire brush it and then throw some lubricant so it pops. But make sure that lubricant, wipe it off once you're done, because that you don't want it to get into the new rotor in between the brakes and the rotor. It's gonna mess up your braking. So now we'll remove that, put the new rotor. before you start putting the new rotor, what you can do is you can grab a small wire brush and start cleaning that area where the new rotor is gonna sit. So you start cleaning all that rust and the rotor sits more firmly, and is for the future is actually cleaner. So we can do that all the way around, and that's gonna help putting it on as well. So now we got our new rotor. Here's the old one, and it's even scratched. So now we can put the bracket for the caliper, and then put all the little sheet metals on it for the brakes, and then we can start putting all that so we can compress the piston on the caliper so we can slide it right over it. The thing is that if your sliders don't slide back and forth like this, you need to take them off and grease them up. Both the bars are good. They need to slide so that there's a flexibility for the caliper when it moves. To compress the piston back in the caliper, we're going to be using one of these manual press, so we can press it in and push the piston back in so it fits over the new brake pads and the rotor. So now what we need to do is we put the brake pads with the two tensioner springs to open them when they're not being used, if they have them, or your brake pads come with it, and that way we can start putting our caliper over it, putting it on and tightening it down. Now that we have our brand new rotor, brake pads, we put our caliper and bolted it down. So there it is. We replaced the driver's side as well. We put everything back together. So all we need to do is just close our reservoir, and then we can press the pedal so everything comes back to where it needs to be. Another thing is when you're compressing the pistons or the calipers back in to open the throat of it to go over it, over the rotor and new brake pads, you want to make sure that that oil on the reservoir doesn't overflow and it ends up in the engine compartment and draining all the way out to the ground. So that oil can eat your paint on your car and damage stuff. So you don't want to have oil overflowing out of that. So you might have it to that level, but when you compress these pistons back in, there's too much oil that will overflow. So pay attention to that as well. Well, folks, hopefully this video was useful and helpful how we did this replacement on Toyota Camry front disc brakes and brake pads. So that way you need to do it to your car, and you have the similar system on your car. That way you can do it yourself and save a lot of money, so you don't have to take it to shops. And with that's it. For friends who are watching a video, haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like a video, give us a thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here in the canal de Chano Jose.